I'm Simon from Howell Green Nursery, based in Kent, well, Hever, near Hever Castle. First, I want to thank Ollie and his team for inviting me down today. And I'm sure you'll agree, it's amazing. I popped down about a month ago, and it was literally a building site, knee-high with mud, and you could never second guess this would be the result in such a short space of time. And so you guys obviously worked really hard on the gardens, and it certainly shows. So just a quick background about who we are and what we do. It's a family business started by my dad. We're in our 41st year, so last year was quite a landmark for us. I found out only 2% of businesses get to 40 years. That's quite an achievement. So we've gone through several guises. My dad started out as a bedding plant grower back in the 80s. His background was he worked for Kew Gardens and worked there for 7 years, and then he managed. I was brought up in an enormous bedding plant nursery in South East London, so he grew a lot of the plants for parks and hanging baskets for local authorities. Well, as was the way back in the 80s, a lot of these nurseries were sold off for development, but of course they still wanted the plants. So that's how the nursery came about. With Dad's contacts, we grew about 1 million bedding plants, and we rented multiple sites, selling back to effectively the people that he worked for. That was great insofar as we grew 1 million plants. There was no wastage. There was 2 crops. There was a summer bedding and an autumn bedding. So you had an empty site literally twice a year, and it gave a lot of satisfaction. You grew all these plants, it was gone. There was no wastage, and more importantly, there was a thing called a cheque that arrived in the post the day after the last delivery. Well, those days have gone. Local authority cutbacks, government cutbacks, and of course the budget for gardens, that's the first thing to be slashed. So I joined the company about 25 years ago. I didn't actually naturally start out in the world of plants. I've never been afraid of hard work, but I looked at my mum and dad. It was a 7-day-a-week job. For what we do, I always say we're like a farmer. It's no different. We're producing an ornamental crop. And I looked at my mum and dad and thought, oh God, hats off to you, but do I want to do that? So I pursued a career in fish farming. And I studied that for 4 years, which was great to a point. And then it was between jobs. I had the bank of mum and dad to pay back. So I did some work for them whilst looking for a new job. That's 25 years ago. So it sounds odd, but the skills that I actually adopted through fish farming are transferable. It's a living thing, good husbandry techniques. It sounds odd, but 4 years wasn't wasted. So when I joined the realm, we had to think of something different. Bedding plants kind of on the wane. The margins weren't so great. So we looked at garden centres. Well, again, bedding plants are what they are. If they're not contracted out and you don't sell them, there's a huge amount of wastage. So again, we looked at other options. So I had a thing for herbaceous perennials, and that's what we started growing and have done ever since. So we grew for some big chain garden centres, and again, it was a great market to be in. We got good prices, but interestingly, and Karen will kind of back me up on this, but I started seeing a business coach. And he looked at my figures and he was going, not this, no, but the business figures, and he saw this. There wasn't like a nice steady straight line on my P&L. It was just up, down, up, down, up, down. That's based around that retail is very much, of course, dictated by, of course, the weather. So of course, what we're finding, you get a really good peak, and you look back and well, that's a great spring. It was a great summer weather-wise. Well, of course, if you imagine the spring we've just had or haven't had. I mean, they're saying garden centre sales are about 11% down, but if you look further into that, plant sales will be way down. A really high percentage. So we tried to look at the business coach said, how can you kind of create that straight line? And I looked at him and thought, well, you know what, I don't know. Plants are plants, gardens are gardens. We either spend a time when the weather's fair, or if you've got a lovely structure like this, obviously it's a bit different. But so the penny dropped one day when a designer came in. We had about 2 inches of snow on the ground. I've got to have 50 steeper tenuissima. You've got 50 steeper tenuissima. I said, well, I have, if you can find them out there. And she was scrabbling around and picked 50 out and she said, I've got to get it in the ground today. And I'm like, what? I didn't question, and off she went. And of course, what we found with the designer market, and I would say designer, landscaper, designer, is that, of course, you're working to a time frame. So you've obviously priced your job up with time in mind. So I think, again, another great sort of basically a couple of weeks before Christmas, and we had that snow and ice and -8, and our fleet with a fleet of 3 vans were on the road every single day in thick snow, ice, based on the fact we've got to get these in the ground. The clients are badgering us. They want the projects finished by Christmas. So you see my point. You know, we're now angling towards more the designer market, because it's taken that one thing as a businessman that I cannot control, and that's the weather. So of course, yeah, if quote goes to order, you know it's going to happen. There might be a delay, and I guess, you know, you've all had delays on your projects this spring, but ultimately once that quote signed off, it will happen. So that's a bit about us and where we're at the moment. We're still specialising in herbaceous perennials. We do that on site. We grow annual production about 500,000 plants, mainly in 2-3 litre pots. But again, the designers are coming to us and saying, well, look, we want the trees, we want the tree ferns, we want the hedging, we want, you know, the whole shebang. So effectively now a third of our turnover is in outsourced materials. So we've got connections throughout Europe, and look, I'm trying to support UK horticulture as best I can, but we are a dying breed, so we are still reliant on, you know, Europe, especially for the bigger items. So yeah, so we quote on just about everything, and the really important thing the last 18 months, or 2 years I should say, is that we've gone over to peat-free compost, which is what I brought a selection of plants with me today. Look, business is business, which is great, but I do feel very strongly about the ethics side of our industry. Now, there's 2 things that are very contentious. That's the use of peat and, of course, plastics. They're the two main things, because let's face it, our end product and what you guys do, look, you're enhancing the environment, aren't we? So we've trialled peat-free for 15 years. It's not a flash in the pan thing. It's not a marketing gimmick. You don't get many jollies in commercial horticulture. You really don't. I can tell you that. But about 15 years ago, our peat supplier at the time said, look, to me and my dad, 2 days expenses trip to the Scottish peat bogs. Now, I know that doesn't sound like a, you know, that doesn't, it certainly wasn't a party, but yeah, we jumped at the chance. But there was a group of us, about 15 growers, and the company were very proud of themselves, saying, well, the peat goes down 8 metres, we're only harvesting the top 4 metres and handing the land over to English Heritage. Fair dues, you might say, but the slide door went back, we all clambered out, and I kid you not, we were genuinely shocked. I mean, thousands of hectares, I mean, literally laid waste. And to say that, you know, peat was a sustainable practice, no, it kind of resonated way back then, before we even knew about this kind of digging it out of the ground and carbon sump and the environment. So we've trialled peat-free every year for 15 years. Absolutely hopeless, and I mean that. And not only on losses, growth hasn't been brilliant. You have to pump loads of liquid feed on the crop to get any saleability into it. So, you know, as a business, you know, we couldn't take that as a hit to suddenly put our production over to that compost. Well, in lockdown, a rep rocked up, and our site was completely closed to walk-in visits. We had a lot of high-risk staff, and he said, I've got to talk to you. We've nailed it. I went, okay, but so 200 metres is the length of our driveway. We had this conversation from one end of the driveway to the next and say, look, we've nailed a herbaceous mix. Some great results, not getting the losses, but more importantly, it retains water, because a lot of peat-free mixes use coir fibre, which, those of you who don't know, is coconut husk. And that's shipped halfway around the world, mainly from Sri Lanka. So you've got that kind of, that doesn't sit easy with me either. You've got that carbon footprint of that, but it does not retain water. Well, as we've seen from the last summer, excuse me, water is a really valuable commodity. So this product here, I'd say pass it around, but I do urge you to get your hands dirty after my talk, because it's a bark fibre product. So what that means is it's a byproduct from the forestry industry in this country. So you've got, I say, the carbon footprint, we haven't got that as an issue. It's only got 5% coir in there, and we're looking to have that replaced with wool. Because they're shearing sheep nowadays and throwing the fleeces in the bin. They're not worth anything. So we're looking to eradicate the coir by hopefully the end of this year. The great thing about the bark fibre is that this product here is, we have 2 mixes. Sorry, we have a winter mix, which is a coarser grade, because we want the drainage. So a lot of our plants are grown outside, so we want the plants to be free draining. We had the least losses in the 2 winters that we've grown using this product. And then in the summer, or should I say the spring, we have which is this mix here, the summer mix. The fibre is a lot finer, and what you tend to find, you add water to it, and it plumps up like a sponge, and it retains the water. So, talking to a lot of growers that we when we're doing our research into peat free, you have to completely change your watering regime. Water 3-4 times a day. Well, I thought, well, God, I mean, life's too short for that. We haven't got the time to water 3 or 4 times a day. So with this, we didn't change our regime at all. We didn't increase water usage. It held the water, and if there's never been an acid test, then that summer, then that was it. The biggest problem with it is that because it's a relatively raw material, and by that I mean it unlike peat, which you can imagine is composted down through tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, it's inert, which means there's no nutritional value to it whatsoever. Which sounds a bit odd. You think, oh, peat, it's dug out of the ground. It must be like nutrient-rich compost. It's not. It's inert. The thing is with the fresh bark is that it's actually still naturally composting down. The problem with that is, and nobody's quite sure why it does that, is that it locks up nutrients. Whereas the compost is naturally composting down. Our soil heap, if you put your hand in it, it's around about 45 degrees. Seriously, the heat it generates. So that's been a big problem with locking up of nutrient, then obviously adversely affects your crop. Well, the science behind this is the fertiliser that's within the actual compost. Now, when we go back to say fertiliser we know is not an environmental product, but we had to use it in peat anyway. It's inert. We had to put fertiliser into compost. The old rule of thumb was just chuck more fertiliser in. If you're getting lock-up, just chuck more nutrient. Of course, that goes against the ethos of environment and, of course, cost to us. So the clever blighters at ICL, he talked to me for an hour. I must confess I glazed over at one point, just saw his lips moving, going, I've no idea what you're talking about, mate. But there's 3 different rates of slow-release fertiliser in that. So we haven't actually increased fertiliser consumption. It's just that the 3 grades of slow release in there actually react at different temperatures. There's one in there that doesn't react until 2 months after you've potted. So you get this even rate of nutrient release. And so from that perspective, I can honestly say, look, all the plants I brought with me today are all grown in peat-free compost. Now, like I say, up until literally a couple of years ago, you'd think, oh God, you'd look at everything be yellowing leaves, stunted growth. But I brought a selection of plants with me today just to show you it has not affected quality whatsoever. In fact, I would say it's actually improved our quality because rooting's much better. And when I say much better, the plants root in a lot quicker. So of course that then enables the plant to take up water and nutrients a lot quicker. So you get a much more established plant quicker than we did with peat. Interestingly, top growth is slightly slower than when we were growing in peat. Now, that, as we now learn, is a good thing because we're getting this kind of even rate of growth, not only sort of height but width. Peat would be, with the fertiliser kind of included in it, would be like rocket fuel, and you get this elongation of plants, which meant we'd have to spend a lot of time cutting plants back. So you've got the time aspect, and then you haven't got a sellable plant for a number of weeks. So we're finding that the growth rate on it really suits our needs. So that's pretty much about the peat, the peat free. The big thing with our industry is that we've been given a target of 2030 that all UK horticulture to be peat free. Don't think we're going to make it. I think there was a target for 2010 and only 10% of us were using peat free back then. The reason why, our products, the herbaceous perennials are generally, it's a very quick turnaround product, 6 months, a year at most, sitting on our site. When you've got big things like shrubs, what the shrub growers are finding is that, yeah, they grow away fine, but you're probably investing sort of like a 2-3 year, maybe longer with some of these bigger shrubs into your growing cycle. Well, the thing is with the peat free is that they're finding that you're getting compaction over time, which means there's not enough air going to the roots. And so they're struggling. The shrub growers at the moment are struggling with a peat-free alternative for that reason. But I think we will get there. you may not, or you may know that peat-free is actually banned. Peat is banned from garden centres as of next year. So if you've got clients that you deal with and say, "Oh God, I've got this rubbish from the garden centre," invariably it will be. But the one thing I can say, if the product or the peat-free on the bag has an ingredient sort of list, urge them to go for the bark fibre, because the coir fibre is hopeless. So that's pretty much about our production, and proud to say we've gone over to the peat. Pots, plastic, again, very contentious issue. We found an alternative. It's a bamboo resin. It handles very similarly to the pots we're using today, but unfortunately the price point isn't quite there. I mean, it's way off. I mean, we're paying about 7-8 pence for a pot at the moment, and they're about £1.10. So the actual technology is there to produce a pot that we can all is fully compostable. You can argue, there's a carbon footprint on the bamboo, but let's face it, bamboo could be coppiced, grown in a very sustainable way out in Asia, and grown purposely, specifically for this particular product. So look, technology's there. I think we will get there in a very short space of time. Let's face it, it's public awareness, isn't it? I mean, it's only up until very recently that you mentioned peat-free to a client. They're like, so what? What's that to do with? But now we know, obviously, the environment is detrimental. So similarly with plastics, that's the one thing we're working on at the moment. So a bit about what we do or what we grow. Now, look, interesting. We've come into the designer world, and we used to grow. We used to go thousands of different lines. We used to grow in small batches, say for the garden centre trade. We used to grow 70 heucheras. We used to grow 70 geraniums. It was an industry that liked us for the variety that we grew. What we're finding with the designer world is that, in fact, actually that palette that we now grow is getting smaller and smaller and smaller, because basically, let's face it, our top 20 plants contributed nearly 70% of our sales last year. And that's Salvia Caradon and a Peter Walker's Low, Hack and a Climac. Look, and I get it, and I totally get it, because look, you as a designer or landscaper, you don't want that phone call from the client saying this has died, that's died, and you want reliability, you want long seasonal interest, and you want obviously ease of maintenance. And those three things do kind of whittle away a lot of plants, because everybody says you probably have it time and time again. We want this lovely English cottage garden, and then you say to the client, well, how much time have you got? What's your skill set like? Oh, I haven't got any time. I've never gardened in my life. Well, that whole Chelsea lupins, delphiniums, and all that kind of stuff, forget it, because it is very labour intensive, and there is an element of skill set involved in that. So look, I'm totally understanding of why the plants that we're quoting for is fairly limited, because all those plants that I've just kind of highlighted tick all those boxes. And like I say, there's not an infinite list of plants will do that. So we grow obviously what we call the reliable, the kind of the plants you're constantly using. But I'm a plantsman. And again, my business coach, when I first met him, said, I can see you're passionate. He said, you've got to flip it. You've got to be businessman first, plantsman second. I said, well, look, if I can meet somewhere in the middle, I'm happy, because I'm passionate. And if I'm going to be growing Salvia Caradon and a Peters Walker Low, Rebecca Goldstone for the rest of my life, I'm going to pack it up now, because I love plants. So I think from our perspective, or from, as a business, we're always trying to offer something a bit different. A lot of new cultivars, and again, look, I get it. I know you might think, oh, it's new. I don't know. I've never heard of that. You shy away from it, but I think what we're trying to do at the minute is introduce new cultivars that are variants of plants that trust, and use in your projects day to day. So, look, I'm going to start letting some of these plants do the talking for me, because look, there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of different plants in the world, but Tiarella, right? It's a kind of edge woodland plant, looking great this time of year. Gets lovely sort of foamy flower. This is Spring Symphony. Spring Symphony and Pink Skyrocket are our two biggest sellers by a country mile. There are hundreds of Tiarellas, and I mean that, hundreds. And this is probably one of the best cultivars that we've seen. Cultivars means, if those of you who don't know, it's like it's a sort of man-made, or it's been intensively bred. So this is a relatively new one. This is Tiarella Timbuktu. Now, you think, oh, it doesn't look any different to what I've just shown you before, but it's much more floriferous, i.e. it flat. Yeah, you can see from that one compared to there's a lot more flower on there. You've got this lovely sort of like overlay on the leaf, very sort of serrated leaf, so it's a bit more delicate than, let's say, the Spring Symphony. But when I say delicate, I don't mean it's fully bomb-proof hardy, it's tough as old boots. So again, you've got a slight variant there. What else we've got? Look, plants are all subjective. Look, and I get it, you probably think that's absolutely hideous. Somebody walked to me and said to me the other day, God, that's awful. But look, you've got to think it's a lamium. It's a ground cover plant that likes sort of shade. Well, again, when you start thinking about the aspect where that's going, shade, you think, well, actually, you might want something that's kind of visually stands out. Well, there are other lamiums. I'll show you another one in a minute. But you think, well, that's going into shade. Look at that silver overlay on the leaf. It does flower. But of course, once that's flowered, if you imagine that was just a plain green leaf, it wouldn't look much in for the rest of the season. So I'm also looking at plants that are giving you something beyond its kind of highlight. And by that, I mean, say flowering, for example. So this is a key example. So you probably use this in a project. So Bunner Jack Frost is the prime example of this. It's called a perennial forget-me-not. So you get this massive of blue flower and you can get white. A lovely looking thing, but the straight Brannera macrophylla is a green leaf plant. So imagine once that's done its thing, it sits in the shade for the rest of the year, not bringing anything to the party, let's face it. But with this one, Jack Frost, you've got a silver overlay on the leaf. Now, we grow probably another 6 or 7 different cultivars that we've completely sold out of, which is why I haven't bought them with today. Variants of this. Now, you've got white flowered Mr. Morse, which is a silver leaf one. So what I'm saying is that once that's finished flowering, that's a mound forming with silver leaves in a shady area. That's going to bring interest all year round, even after it's flowered. So we sell Brannera macrophylla, and I think, why? I mean, there's so many plants that have a variation on foliage, and that being one of them. It's called Herman's Pride. It's like a dead nettle of sorts, but that silver leaf. I mean, imagine again, once it's formed a nice big clump, it's visually quite dramatic in an otherwise sort of, dull kind of area, let's say. What else have we got here? Again, geranium phaeums, again, they're a shade-loving plant, and there are loads of different variations, and we always have the same one, Samobor, which is great. It's got a dark overlay on the leaf, but the flower's very dark. Well, again, if you've got a shade-loving plant that's you could argue it could get lost, but there's lots of variants in this lovely Rothbury cherry. So again, just a pop of colour in an ordinary, otherwise quite a dull aspect. So Karen uses it a lot. This is Fatsia green fingers. So Fatsia japonica, which is at the back behind Rob there. It's a big broad leaf plant. It's kind of funny how plants kind of are very, I don't want to use the word trends, but they do. They come and go. In fact, it's made a really big kind of resurgence recently for, kind of like, well, you can see what Karen does with them here. It's that kind of almost like a sort of semi-tropical look, albeit they're reliably hardy. But this is called Polycarpa green fingers. So it's got more of a delicate, leaf pattern to it. And this is spider's web. So you can see it's got that kind of like overlay on the leaf. So again, look, Fatsia japonica is great, but we offer different variants, and I think that's the key thing I keep reiterating is that you know what it is. It's a Fatsia, you know what aspect, where to plant it, but you've got a slight, you've got something a bit different to go out there. So look, am I around? You get me going on plants. I keep on going. Interesting, like I said to you about the shrub growers are struggling with peat-free. Look, I brought this bird of paradise along with me today. That's grown in peat-free, and you can see it's more than happy. The Fatsies are, which are technically a shrub. And we decided to grow a huge range of hydrangea, which again, if I show you, are doing really well in the peat-free. So we're looking to expand our range of big shrub in the coming 12 months. Because, like I say, when we're outsourcing plants, we can say our plants are peat-free, but I get laughed at by the Dutch. Hey, you crazy fool growing in that crap. Well, this is where I beg to differ because we're getting some great results.
Got a Dutchman in the crowd there, Simon. Be careful.
Apologise. Where are you? Sorry about that. Yeah. Yeah. So new plants. We're finding that some of the new variants are. Look, let's face it. I mean, they're not. Oh, sorry. We're not reinventing the wheel. This is called Astrantius Sparkling Stars, and it's a range of Astrantius that's been on the market about 2 or 3 years. They are brilliant. Now, funnily enough, Astrantius, once they're in the ground, can be, I use the word hesitantly invasive, but they can seed, they can run, they can get everywhere. But in container production, in commercial environment, they're a bugger to grow. We cannot get the things to grow. But this Sparkling Star series not only does really well in pots, but in the garden, with Mum's one's flowering in her garden at the moment, the flowers are half as big as any other Astrantia major varieties. It's brilliant on both fronts, from a growing perspective and in the garden, because of the size of the flower. So that's another new variant. Who uses Geranium Roseanne? All those of you, well, yeah, Geranium Roseanne is a great plant. It flowers for months and months and months, as you know. Now, the thing is with it, it can get quite straggly. So if you've got a small garden scenario, it can get a bit untidy. There's some new variants of Roseanne. There's one called Azure Rush, which is a kind of mound-forming. So it's exactly the same. The genetic strain is Roseanne, so you know it's going to have the same length of flowering, pretty much the same colour flower, but it's a much more compact habit. So off the back of that, this is called Geranium Dreamland. This isn't a genetic spore of Roseanne, but it does the same thing, but with pink flowers. So think Roseanne, think length of flowering, no deadheading, no cutting it back. Then again, and you get this lovely sort of pink tinge to the leaf in the winter months. So again, it's a variant. You know, you might think, oh, I've never heard that before, but you know, there's so many new plants that we're pimping at the moment. This is really interesting. It's called Bulbinella. Now, those clients of you that say to you, I want something that flowers and flowers and flowers and flowers, this is it. This is a yellow one. Again, yellow is very subjective. There's an orange one that we've completely sold out of. It flowers for 6-7 months of the year. It's fantastic. It's kind of borderline hardy. It's one of those sort of things you'd say, in a townhouse garden, something like that, but it flowers non-stop. Ticks a load of boxes. So I think we're pretty much done. I mean, I've got a lot of plants with me, but I don't want to, I don't want to see anybody fall asleep. So are there any questions?
Simon, I just want to say thank you for your plants and delivery are always absolutely immaculate. And I know we've been working with you for years now, and you're always so consistent. You're offering more shrubs and trees now, I believe. Will you be offering a tree planting service?
That's a really good question. Yeah, it's one of those things that we're constantly, it's a business you have to do. You have to evolve. You have to think about what else can we do? What else can we offer? So it's something that we potentially might look at. I know there are those that are doing it. I know not Cobblins, Glendale do it, and a few others. So look, I think we're ahead of the curve in certain things with, say the peat-free and that kind of things. But yeah, we'll look at other sides of our business. So yeah, not to say we don't at the moment, but yeah, it's potentially something we could look at. Yeah.
Thanks.
Brilliant. Cheers, Simon. And we love to work with passionate people in their own field, and that oozes out of you, mate. And it's a pleasure to work with you. And thank you so much for supplying all the beautiful plants and trees for the show area. It's muchly appreciated, mate. So thank you.
Pleasure. Cheers. Thank you.